Well, we can get started then. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and having me. Tonight we're going to talk about anxiety, what it is, and why it can feel so powerful, and what we can do when it starts taking over. This is not therapy, and it's not meant to feel like a formal lecture. Think of it more as a guided tour of anxiety and the nervous system. My hope is that you'll leave with a clearer understanding of what may be happening inside your mind and your body, along with a few practical tools that you could actually use in daily life. This is, there's nothing you have to share or participate in. During the exercises, we'll have a couple later. You're always welcome to simply observe, and we're also going to leave time at the end for some questions and conversation. All right. So before we begin, I'll briefly introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Danielle Lefkowitz, though I go by Dani. I'm a mental health specialist. I did my academic training on the East Coast. So I hear there's some others from New York as well, but I did my undergrad at Barnard College, which is a women's college. So it feels nice to be in community here, at Banyan Women's Collective. And then I did my doctoral training at Furkhoff Graduate School of Psychology, also in New York. I've done clinical training across schools, community mental health, trauma clinic, and both public and private hospitals. And outside of work, I love to hike, ski, travel, go to breweries, read, and play lots of board games. Big fan of Settlers of Catan, if we have any other fans in here. So, tonight's roadmap, we will do an introduction to anxiety. We'll talk about some thinking skills, so how to spot certain patterns, some ideas for flexible thinking. We'll also talk about some body-based skills, so grounding and breathing, and we'll practice maybe both of those if we have time. We'll talk about approach, so facing avoidance, which is kind of everyone's natural response to anxiety in small steps. And then we'll summarize and talk about next steps and leave time for questions and conversation. I want to start by emphasizing just how common anxiety is. In any given year, approximately 1 in 5 adults experiences an anxiety disorder. Across a lifespan, close to 1/3 of adults will meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder at some point. Women also experience anxiety at higher rates than men. In a given year, approximately 23% of women experience an anxiety disorder compared to about 14% of men. These statistics do not capture everyone who experiences anxiety, but never receives a formal diagnosis. So the actual number of people struggling with significant anxiety may be even higher. The main point is not the exact percentage. The main point is that anxiety is incredibly common, it's not a failing, and it is treatable. So today we'll learn more about anxiety. I wanted to also introduce a woman-focused lens, just kind of given our audience tonight and the space. I want to acknowledge some of the factors that may shape women's experiences of anxiety, but this does not mean that every woman experiences anxiety in the same way or that anxiety has one simple cause. It's better to think of these as different layers of context. So, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, women experience anxiety twice as frequently as men, as we discussed. Biologically, this can be due to many reasons, like hormonal and reproductive changes can influence anxiety for some women. Symptoms may shift around the menstrual cycle, during pregnancy or postpartum, or during perimenopause and menopause. These experiences vary greatly from person to person. There are also psychological patterns that many women are encouraged or expected to develop, such as being highly responsible, trying to anticipate everyone's needs, avoiding disappointing others, or believing that we must do everything perfectly. Then there's the broader social context. Many women are balancing work, caregiving, relationships, household chores and responsibilities, and the emotional needs of other people, and of course, trauma, discrimination, financial stress, and pressure related to appearance or aging or many other things can add even more strain. So all of this is to say is anxiety is not happening in a vacuum. Sometimes the nervous system is responding to a very real amount of pressure. So, at its core, anxiety is a built-in alarm system. Think of it almost as a smoke detector. I like this analogy. Its job is to detect possible danger, like fire, and prepare us to respond. However, Anxiety is a signal, not a verdict. It tells us that our brain has detected the possibility of danger. It does not necessarily mean that danger is actually present. Think about it. Have there ever been moments when your smoke detector, for example, at your home, rang when there wasn't an emergency? Perhaps maybe when you overcook food or burn a candle at home. I know I have had that experience many times. So when the alarm activates, the body prepares to fight, flee, freeze, or otherwise protect itself. During this process, you experience fight or flight, heart, breath, and muscles all shift, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few slides. Anxiety is designed to be uncomfortable so that it grabs our attention and can feel very real. It tips into a problem when it becomes overly sensitive, firing too often, too intensely, or starts to restrict life. So, like I mentioned, you want a smoke detector, but you don't want one screaming over toast, right? So, one way to understand anxiety is to imagine that the brain has two interacting systems. The first is the fast alarm that we've been discussing. It works like that smoke detector. It reacts quickly and automatically, often before we've even had time to fully understand what is happening. And this speed is really useful actually when there is real danger. We don't want to be carefully deliberating every option if a car is speeding towards us, right? We want to act on instinct in that moment. The second system is the slower thinking system. This is the part that considers context, looks at evidence, solves problems, and asks questions such as, is this actually dangerous or what else could be happening? Now, when that alarm, like we were talking about last slide, becomes very loud, the thinking system can become less effective. Our attention narrows. We have trouble considering other possibilities, and the feared outcome can begin to feel like the only possible outcome. This is why telling someone, just calm down or stop worrying, usually does not work. The alarm has already taken over. So, the skills we're discussing tonight will hopefully create more room for that thinking system to come back online. So we often use the words stress, fear, and anxiety interchangeably. But there are actually some differences, which can be, if we understand them, can help us cope with these emotions a bit better. So stress is usually a response to current demands. For example, I have 3 deadlines, my child is sick, and I have too much to manage. Fear is a response to an immediate threat. For example, if a large dog suddenly lunges towards you, fear helps you react quickly. Anxiety is usually focused on a possible future threat. It often begins with the words, what if? What if I make a mistake? What if someone is upset with me? What if this symptom means something really serious? What if I embarrass myself? What if I can't cope? These experiences certainly overlap. We could be stressed and anxious or even afraid all at the same time. But one defining feature of anxiety is that we are reacting to something that might happen rather than something that is definitely happening right now. So, like I mentioned here, anxiety is about a threat that hasn't happened yet. So, this cycle explains why anxiety can continue even when we know logically that our fear might be exaggerated. So first, something triggers the anxiety, as we have over here. It could be an email, a physical sensation, an upcoming event, a difficult conversation, or even a thought or memory. Next, the alarm system activates. We may experience worried thoughts, physical symptoms, or a strong sense that something is wrong. Naturally, we want relief. We may avoid the situation, cancel plans, repeatedly seek reassurance, over-prepare, procrastinate, check something over and over, and mentally replay the situation. In the short term, these strategies often work. Anxiety decreases and we feel better. We experience short-term relief. However, the brain may then draw the wrong conclusion. It learns that the situation really was dangerous and avoiding it protected me. And the next time the trigger appears, the alarm may activate even more strongly. So this does not mean that we should never avoid anything or ask for reassurance. The question is whether the strategy is helping us solve a genuine problem or if it's a crutch to help us escape anxiety in the short term. So let's talk about how anxiety shows up in the body. So anxiety is not just something that happens in our thoughts, it's actually a whole body response. In our heads, people may experience racing thoughts, dizziness, headaches, lightheadedness, difficulty concentrating, or a sense of being disconnected or unreal. In the chest, anxiety may create a racing heart, shallow breathing, chest tightness, or the feeling that it's really difficult to get a satisfying breath. Across the rest of the body, people may experience tense muscles, shaking, sweating, tingling, fatigue, or suddenly feeling really hot or really cold. The digestive system is also highly connected to the nervous system. Anxiety can contribute to nausea, stomach pain, changes in appetite, diarrhea, constipation, or the sensation of just having this knot in your stomach. These symptoms can be very intense and very convincing. They may make someone think something must be seriously wrong with me. At the same time, we shouldn't automatically assume that every symptom is caused by anxiety. So, of course, if there's any new, severe, persistent, or unexplained symptoms, you might want to check with a medical professional as well. Okay. So, I wanted to talk about some common thinking patterns because when we are anxious, our thoughts often follow these very predictable patterns. And here are some common examples. So, first we have catastrophizing, which means jumping very quickly to the worst possible outcome. A small mistake becomes, I'm going to lose my job, or a physical sensation becomes something is seriously wrong. Next, we have fortune telling. This means treating a feared prediction as though it is already fact. We may think, I know I'm going to panic, or the conversation is going to go so badly. I just know it. Next, we have mind reading. This means assuming we know what another person is thinking, often without much evidence. For example, she didn't text me back, so she must be angry with me. Next, we have all or nothing thinking, which means seeing only two possibilities, either perfect or terrible, successful or a failure. There's nothing in between. But when most things in life usually tend to fall in that gray area. Next, we have emotional reasoning. This means assuming that because something feels dangerous, it must be dangerous. So I feel unsafe, so I must be unsafe. Next, we have should statements or over responsibility, which can sound like I should be able to handle this. I cannot disappoint anyone, or it's my responsibility to make sure everything is okay. So feeling like you have to handle everything yourself. We all experience these thoughts from time to time. The first step is really just becoming more aware of them and noticing that we might be falling into certain thinking traps. And as you get more practice with them, then you can start not just identifying them, but trying to slightly reframe them using some different strategies that we'll talk about soon. But I wanted to first practice, if we're up for it, by matching these thoughts in an exercise together. So what I had in mind is I'm going to read you some examples, and then maybe Bernaz, could you monitor the chat for me? And if you're open and brave to do it, feel free to write your answer in the chat. But of course, as I mentioned, you're welcome to just observe as well. So I have here all the patterns here as a reminder, and I'm going to read some examples, and I'd love if you could, write them in the chat. So let's think about which pattern fits each thought. So we need to talk. I'm definitely getting fired. I'm going to give a couple seconds or so people have time to write in the chat.
I'll read out some of the answers. Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute for a second. We have a response from Judith. She says mind reading, and then Steve typed in fortune telling.
Mm, Yes. It is one of those, and those I think tend to be ones that we get confused. So I'm going to reveal on the next slide, but let's keep going. And then maybe when we do some more, we can kind of find an answer to that. So next, she hasn't texted back, so she must be upset with me. What do we think this one is?
We have catastrophizing from Steve.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next we have, if I can't do this perfectly, there's no point in trying.
We have all or nothing from both Judith and Steve.
Nice. Good work, guys. Then we have, I feel anxious about the flight, so it must not be safe.
We have emotional reasoning from Judith and fortune telling from Steve.
Okay, nice. And then I just know I'll freeze up and embarrass myself tomorrow.
We have fortune telling from both Judith and Steve.
Okay, great work. And then lastly, everyone's counting on me. I should handle it all. And this one has a little clue in it.
And we have should statements from both Steve and Judith. And then Judith also just noted over responsibility.
Yeah, those kind of go together. Exactly. Great work. Really appreciate your engagement there. I know that sometimes it can be scary and not knowing the right answer. And remember, we're just getting used to this. And a lot of these kind of sound very similar. So it's just a practice of getting more comfortable with noticing these. But we're going to review these in a bit more detail. So yeah, we need to talk. So I must be getting fired is an example of catastrophizing. The mind has taken an unclear situation and immediately filled in the worst outcome. Next, we have she hasn't texted back, so she must be upset, is a really good example of mind reading. We're assuming we know what her silence means without actually having that information. Next is if I cannot do it perfectly, there's no point. Reflects all or nothing thinking and perfectionism. And I think we all got this one right. There's no room in this example for doing something adequately, learning, or just being human, right? Next, I feel anxious, so it must not be safe is emotional reasoning. This feeling of not being safe or feeling anxious is being treated as evidence. And then we have I know I'll freeze tomorrow is a really good example of fortune telling. We're predicting the future as though it has already happened, but again, we don't know the future. We're not fortune tellers. And then we have everyone is counting on me, so I should handle everything. I think everyone got this one. Reflects should statements or over responsibility, putting kind of all the pressure on oneself. But really good work with you got that, and I appreciate your engagement. So I wanted to talk about some strategies we can do when we have thinking traps like that. And we can use some cognitive or thought-based skills to kind of challenge our anxious thoughts in those moments. So when people hear challenge your thoughts, they sometimes assume it means forcing yourself to think positively, and this is actually not the goal. We're not trying to replace everything will go terribly with everything will be perfect because neither statement would be realistic. The goal is actually flexible thinking, not positive thinking. So here are some strategies that can work really well. First is noticing the thought. It can be really helpful to say, I'm having the thought that before any thought. So I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail rather than I'm going to fail. That small change of adding I'm having the thought that, we call that cognitive diffusion, and it creates a little distance from that thought. So you have a little bit of room to look at it a bit more objectively and it feels less immediate and certain. So that's a good hack I have is always putting, I am having the thought that. before any anxious thought. Next, check the facts. What evidence supports a thought? What evidence does not support it? This also helps you consider it more neutrally and create some distance. Then consider other possibilities. What is most likely, rather than only what is the worst case scenario. You could also think maybe what's the best case scenario too, right? Um, it can also be helpful to remember your ability to cope. So even if something uncomfortable or disappointing did happen, what could you do? Who could support you? And maybe by kind of following that thread, you might realize, oh, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, and I can handle this situation. And then finally, choosing a response based on your goals and values rather than solely on what anxiety is telling you to do. This gives you a greater sense of agency and control. So, as this example says, before we talked about we need to talk, I'm getting fired. You could actually think, I don't actually know what this is about yet. I can respond when I do. So, again, this is not fake positivity, it's just a more accurate and workable thought. Because anxiety happens in the body, as we discussed, we could also use some body-based skills. So, breathing, which it sounds like we're all pretty familiar here in this space with, but it can be really helpful to slow the body's stress response, particularly when the exhale is gentle and slightly longer than the inhale. And I actually have a breathing strategy that I'll introduce if we have some time for that. Next, grounding, which we're going to practice shortly. This helps bring our attention back to what is actually happening in the present moment, which is helpful as anxiety is often focused on ruminating about the past, which can't be changed, or worrying about the future, which hasn't happened yet. Movement can also be helpful for releasing some of that energy produced by fight or flight. This does not mean you have to have a full workout. Walking, stretching, shaking out the hands, or changing physical positions can also help. And the basic foundations matter too. Sleep, regular meals, hydration, rest, and reducing muscle tension can all affect how sensitive the alarm system becomes. So we're going to practice a few of these skills. During our practice, you're welcome to keep your eyes open, pause, modify the exercise, or simply observe. So the first skill I want to practice together is called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. Some of you may have heard of this before. So the goal here is not to make every anxious feeling disappear. Grounding simply helps bring some of our attention out of the imagined future and back into the present moment to really practice that mindfulness. So first, I'd like everyone to try to just get into a comfortable position. Feel free to kind of sit back in your chair, put your feet on the ground, whatever you want to do. You could keep your eyes open or keep them closed. And first, I want you to quietly notice 5 things you can see right now. They can be ordinary things like a light, a color, a piece of furniture, maybe your shoes, maybe the computer in front of you, or a shadow. But I'm going to give you a minute or so to just really observe 5 things around you. Okay. Now I want you to notice 4 things that you can physically feel. Perhaps it's your feet touching the floor, your back against the chair, the fabric of your clothing, or the temperature of the air. But just take a moment or two to really observe 4 things you can physically feel. All right. Next, I want you to notice 3 things you can hear. Try to include sounds that are both inside and outside of the room. Now try to identify two things you can smell. If you can't smell anything right now, try to think of two familiar or comforting scents. All right, finally, I want you to notice one thing that you can taste, or take one slow and comfortable breath. Okay. So I want to pause here. If you're open to it, feel free to share maybe one word that you're feeling after doing this grounding exercise. And Murnaz, if there are any responses, do you mind reading them out loud?
I see that Judith wrote calmer and I also wrote focused.
Mm.
That was great. Thank you.
Great. Those are beautiful words. Yeah, so there, like I mentioned, there's no particular feeling that you're supposed to have afterwards. You might feel calmer, like one of you said, slightly more present, slightly more focused, or just not different at all. And that's okay. The practice is simply about using your senses to return your attention to the present, right? Which can be really helpful for targeting anxiety because like we mentioned, anxiety is often rooted in the past. Like, why did I do that? Ruminating, being really having a lot of self-criticism and or it's very future oriented. What if this happens? What if this happens? So it's all about kind of returning our attention to the present. So I like this one. Since it looks like we have time, I'll do a breathing strategy. So here's another strategy that's really easy to remember and also use pretty discreetly. So you can either, we call this star breathing or finger breathing because it works both ways. You can either trace the shape of a star or kind of use your hands like so. But basically, as you breathe in, you trace up each point um, you can trace the shape of the star with your finger or simply follow it with your eyes. And as you trace upward along one side of a point, you want to breathe in gently. I always suggest breathing in through your nose rather than your mouth, like so. And you might count to four, but the exact number is not really that important. It's just making sure that you're having an inhale. And so you can do that through the star or sometimes through your hand. So as you go up. Now, as you trace downward, breathe out a little bit more slowly. And when I say breathe out, I like to do that very slowly and controlled, like you're breathing through a straw, like so. So you can do that either with the star or with your hands. So as you go in. You can kind of, on your exhale, try to think about counting down to six, but again, the number's not important. You just want your exhale to be a little longer and more gentle than your inhale. And that's because during your exhale, that's when you experience that relaxation. Think of it this way. If your inhale was like longer than your exhale, you might be holding in air and you might be at risk of like hyperventilating or something, and it would be counterproductive. So the idea is you want to make sure that your exhale is a bit longer than your inhale, and you'll know it's working when you feel that breath in your belly. That's a sign that it's working. So we can kind of do that along each of the points. So breathe in for four through your nose. Now exhale slowly through your mouth like you're blowing through a straw. Breathe in through your nose. Now exhale slowly like you're breathing through a straw. Breathe in through your nose. Now exhale slowly. Breathe in through your nose. Exhale slowly. Breathe in through your nose. Exhale slowly. So, what I like about this strategy is whether you use the hand or the star, it really requires you to get that repetition in and make sure that you're really doing it along 5 different points, in and out. Oftentimes, we're taught breathing, like box breathing is a very common one, but I find it can be really hard to remember, oh, how much do I breathe? How long? And it feels very abstract to me. So, I really like the physical and the visual cue of having a star or even using your hand. And what's nice about your hand is like you always have it on you. So you can just do that in a moment of panic, just trace it on your hand. Or if you're in a public space and you want to do it more discreetly, you can kind of gently put your hand on your lap and do the same thing, just tracing it with your finger as you take your breaths. So hopefully the strategy is a bit helpful for those who don't know where to start with their breathing journey. Okay. So now I want to talk about approach, which is really the last concept. As we discussed on that anxiety wheel earlier, right? Avoidance tends to be our most common response to anxiety, and it makes a lot of sense. We want short-term relief. We want to escape the thing that's causing us a lot of distress. So one of the most important parts of anxiety treatment is actually approaching rather than avoiding. Anxiety often tells us wait until you feel confident and then do the thing. But unfortunately, confidence usually does not come first. Confidence tends to develop after we take action and discover that we can tolerate the experience. So, how do we start with approach? That can feel like very scary initially. So, you start by identifying something that anxiety has made a bit smaller in your life. It should be something safe and meaningful that you've been avoiding, such as maybe it's socializing or setting a boundary or driving or making a phone call or speaking up or attending an appointment. Then you want to break it into a step that feels challenging but manageable. We don't want to begin with the most overwhelming version. So, for example, if hosting a gathering feels impossible, and that's what our example is over here, the first step might be replying to a friend's text message. Then the next could be meeting with that friend for about 20 minutes. Then it could be attending a small gathering for about 30 minutes. And eventually it could be inviting 2 friends over. And then finally hosting the gathering. So that's how we gradually approach avoidance. One thing I want to mention is some discomfort is to be expected. Feeling anxious doesn't mean that the step does not, feeling anxious during the step does not mean that what you're doing is wrong or that the situation is unsafe. Um, Success is not I stayed completely calm. It's just that I showed up and I practiced and I tried. So you're praising that effort. With repetition, the brain begins to learn. I can experience anxiety without escaping, and I can handle what comes next. So, as we do exposure and kind of approach the feared stimulus, whatever it might be, it basically teaches your brain, I can do this, and it subverts expectations because maybe it wasn't as scary as you thought it might be in your head. And that's how the brain learns. So, again, measure success by showing up, not by staying calm, and confidence follows action. So I want to leave with some takeaways. One is anxiety is uncomfortable. It's designed to be that way, but it's not automatic proof of danger. Second, avoidance lowers anxiety in the short term, but it usually strengthens it later and over time. And third, small and repeated actions build confidence and flexibility and reduce anxiety over time. So I want to talk about when to seek more support. So, when anxiety is persistent, like happening nonstop, or it feels really hard to control, or it's interfering with your life, that might be a time to seek more support. So, CBT, that stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, it's kind of a therapy where you learn about how your thoughts, your feelings, and your behavior are all interconnected and constantly influencing each other. And CBT believes that thoughts, feelings, and behavior can all be different intervention points. So that's a really great option if you're experiencing anxiety. That tends to be the gold standard approach. And also exposure-based therapy, kind of similar to what we were talking about with approach, are also is very well supported for anxiety treatment. And medication can also help. If you don't know where to start, you can start with your primary care physician, going through your insurance, or findtreatment.gov can help you find a therapist as well. And then, of course, if you're experiencing any emergencies in the US, you can call or text 988, which is a national hotline for mental health crises. Or you could call 911, of course, or go to your nearest emergency department for any emergencies. So, that is what I have for today. I know that we have a lot of time for questions, so I just wanted to end here. Thank you so much for having me and see if we have any questions.
If anybody has questions, you can type them in the chat box, or you should be able to unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask. Jennifer says, no questions, but this was so great. Thank you for joining, Jennifer, and thank you, Dani. Yeah, I just wanted to comment, like, I really appreciated you going through the different steps of like how the anxiety can show up and like the different ways to name them, the
Hmm.
categories. Like that exercise felt helpful, especially because then like being able to more easily identify like, okay, what is my mind
Hmm.
going to now? Am I catastrophizing? Like, what are they catastrophizing? Fortune telling,
Hmm.
should statements.
This is
Oh,
great review. I love it.
yeah, I'm like, oh, mind reading. Is there one more or two more?
I wasn't sure if you mentioned emotional reasoning
Emotional reasoning.
and all or nothing thinking. That's kind of like that perfectionism, but great, great work.
Mhm. Judith says the anxiety cycle you presented seems very similar to the OCD loop cycle. What would you say are the main differences or specificities? And thank you for the wonderful talk and tools.
Such a great question. And that makes a lot of sense because OCD is actually kind of a form of anxiety, right? It's a slightly different presentation, but when we have OCD, we have these worry thoughts, these obsessive thoughts. And then often it's associated with those compulsions, feeling like we need to do certain behaviors to prevent those scary thoughts, those obsessive thoughts from occurring. So it's actually a form of anxiety. So actually, w when you talked about the anxiety cycle, that's a great question because the treatment, the gold standard approach for OCD treatment is actually exposure and response prevention. So that's why that might seem really familiar. Hopefully that makes sense. So I guess the main difference is anxiety is kind of a broader term. So we might target that through exposure, depending on the presentation, if it's more of an OCD one, or if exposure might be helpful, or we might target it through some more thought-based strategies. Oh, good. I'm glad that made sense.
All right. If there aren't any more questions, yeah, I just want to say again, thank you so much, Dani, for joining Banyan Tree Women's Collective and offering this talk on mental health, specifically on anxiety. You shared a wealth of knowledge, greatly appreciated. And yeah, again, everybody, thank you all for being here. If you're interested in staying connected with Banyan Tree Women's Collective, please check out our website. I'll drop it here in the chat. It's www.banyanwomen.org. And yeah, we have in-person classes. Sometimes we do stuff online when we have guest speakers like these generous women like Dani and Mernaz. Yeah, but take a look at our events page. You can see our calendar listing all upcoming classes. And again, because we're a 501c3 nonprofit, our classes are free to attend, and we also greatly appreciate people who want to support us monetarily through donations, and also if donating is not within your means, spreading the word, inviting more people to come take advantage of our classes is just as powerful, and still a lot of deep gratitude for any way you want to spread the word about this nonprofit. So when I close out the meeting, you should be redirected to another quick little survey. So please take a moment to answer those questions. We really appreciate your participation and time. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.